Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for an artist talk with Lisa Miles. I'm Tatiana Ginsberg. I'm Director of Artistic Projects and a Master Collaborator at Deepening. We are a cultural nonprofit dedicated to serving emerging and established artists through the collaborative creation of contemporary art and hand papermaking. You can see recordings of all our past virtual artist talks through our website or on our YouTube page. During the webinar, you can turn on automated captions by clicking the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen. And in that same area, you'll see there's a Q&A function to submit questions throughout the talk. And we do kind of encourage you to submit your questions as you're thinking about them, but then we'll come back to all of the questions at the end. So tonight, I'm honored to introduce today's speaker, Lisa Miles. I met Lisa some years ago when I was teaching at the University of Iowa Center for the Book, where she was a graduate student finishing up her MFA. Lisa Miles is a very talented papermaker and book artist who creates one-of-a-kind hand-beaten bark paperworks with works in many public and private collections all over. She's originally from New England and is now based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In 2016, she researched papel in Mexico, and in 2017 to 18, she received a Fulbright Arts research grant to investigate bark paper, plant dyes, and book arts in Indonesia. She will tell us more about her artwork and her research tonight. So without further ado, please welcome Lisa.
Thank you, Tatiana. What if the land itself is the first collaborator in every creative act? That question is at the heart of my practice. In the center, you see a landscape formed not with paint or pigment, but with plant-dyed kozo fiber. It's an abstract composition made from hand-beaten bark. To the left is kota, also known as Navajo tea, and to the right, indigo leaves, both natural dyes that I grow in my home garden. By growing my own dye and fiber plants, I'm able to stay connected to the full cycle of my materials, and it's a more sustainable and affordable way to create. Hi, I'm Lisa Miles, and I've been in a committed relationship with plants for over 30 years. It started with what's on my plate. I've been plant-based since a weird middle school all-state band performance in 1994. I started growing my own food in 2008, ditched dairy and became vegan in 2009, and I've been working with plants to make books, paper, and dyes for over a decade. Since 2020, I've been cultivating a dye and fiber garden and deepening my connection to the land and the materials I work with. Here you see the dye plant, matter growing in a container in my garden. I'm grateful to call New Mexico my home after moving to Santa Fe from Boston over 20 years ago. And honestly, I'm still amazed by the quality of the light, the staggering landscapes, and just how much history is layered into this place. However, I frequently reckon with the question of what it means to live on stolen land. It's not a simple or comfortable question to reckon with. It's one that requires ongoing reflection and humility. The complex histories, stories, and cultural tensions of this region go back centuries before I arrived. In exploring ancient Southwest sites like Chaco Canyon, pictured here, Bandelier, the Gila cliff dwellings, and Mesa Verde in Colorado, I found myself completely captivated by the intricate craftsmanship, sophisticated architecture, and remarkable achievements of the people who lived here long before us. Hiking, camping, and meditating in these landscapes has been a profound source of inspiration for me. Then I learned about El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, or the Royal Road of the Interior Land, a historic trade route established by the Spanish in 1598 that stretches from right outside my door in northern New Mexico all the way to central Mexico. Spoiler alert, this official road was actually built on top of a network of indigenous footpaths and trade corridors that had connected ancient cultures in Mexico and what is now American Southwest for centuries before the Spanish arrived. The very first or last stop at the northern end is Oquewingue, also known as San Juan Pueblo. The next stop is Santa Fe, and from there, the route winds south through a series of historic cities and towns, eventually reaching Mexico City, once the capital of New Spain and the seat of Spanish colonial power in the Americas. After that discovery, it really changed the way I saw things. I started to understand just how connected the ancestors of this land really were. It made me realize that these weren't isolated communities, but part of a vast network that shaped the history and culture of this entire region. Exploring Mexico, especially visiting Aztec and Maya sites across the country, has been incredibly important to my artistic research. The Teotihuacan archaeological zone, just north of Mexico City, pictured here, was a particular highlight. Connecting the two ends of El Camino Real, I found myself caught up in the in-between, that long stretch of time where civilizations rise and fall, and new ones take their place. It made me reflect on how history isn't just what's behind us or what's here now, but everything that happens in the middle, shaping who we are today. Through these travels, I became even more intrigued by the hieroglyphs and material culture of these ancient societies. Both the Maya and Aztec have created mind-blowing books filled with richly illustrated glyphs and pictographs detailing agricultural calendars, astronomical observations, and historical records. Here, in this image from the Fustaman facsimile, you see a detail from the Dresden Codex, which is the oldest and most intact of only 4 surviving Maya books, dating back to the 12th century. To suppress indigenous knowledge and culture, the Spanish conquistadors eradicated any native books or paper that they could get their hands on. The loss of these writings is an immeasurable tragedy. As an emerging book artist and papermaker, I became fascinated by these bark paper codices. Soon I was determined to learn how to make bark paper, which is used in the ancient accordion fold books. The book has 39 pages that are illuminated on both sides, with each page being approximately 8.1 inches by 3.9 inches wide. And looking at the Dresden Codex is wild. It's like you're actually seeing how the Maya saw the world, imagined their gods, and tracked their stars. It's not just old paper and ink. It's a direct link into their world. If you want to see it in person, the Codex is on permanent view at the Saxon State University Library in Dresden, Germany. If you're a book nerd, you'll regret skipping this one. The FOMO is real and totally justified. After taking every book arts and papermaking class available at the Santa Fe Community College, I was still hungry for more. To enrich my skills and knowledge, I pursued hands-on papermaking research at the University of Iowa Center for the Book by working as a research assistant to MacArthur Fellow Timothy Barrett, who is widely regarded as one of the world's leading experts on historic papermaking traditions. To the left, Tim is forming a sheet of Japanese-style washi paper. On the right, I'm pulling back the sue or screen to reveal a freshly pulled sheet. At the University of Iowa's Oakdale campus and paper research and production facility, they cultivate a plot of Japanese kozo plants, which are harvested each year for use in traditional Japanese papermaking. This little baby is coming up in the spring. I'll walk you through the steps involved in preparing these fibers. After the trees are tall and the leaves drop in the autumn, they are harvested at the base. But the good news is that they regenerate each year. Here, freshly cut sticks are bundled together for easy transport and then steamed to help the bark come off more easily. After steaming, the bark is loosened and peeled away from the stick. The black outer bark is then scraped off because what we're really after here is the inner white bark. On the far left is kozo with black bark, sitting next to scraped white bark. The clean white inner bark is cooked for about 2 hours with soda ash or wood ash to soften the fibers. Personally, I love the smell of cooking kozo. It's very fresh and herbaceous, and it kind of looks like noodles simmering in a pot. I'm always tempted to taste it. To date, I have not. Okay, so now that kozo has been steamed and cleaned and cooked and inspected once again, it's finally ready to be beaten. So you go to town and beat it into a pulp with wood mallets, and then you're ready to add it to the vat to start forming Japanese paper. But stay with me. Let's go back one step. If after cooking and cleaning the kozo, you were to pause before beating the fiber into a pulp, you could choose to explore a completely different approach to papermaking. Here, the cooked fibers are arranged on a wooden board in a crisscross pattern framed with a border. After beating the fibers with a volcanic stone and letting them dry in the sun, you're rewarded with a modeled sheet of a mate-style paper. I was surprised to realize that the techniques of these distant papermaking traditions share so many similar stages. The main differences in the final sheet depend on the choices made during the last steps of the process. A mate, or a model, is a Nahuatl word or Aztec word for paper. Amate paper is made by beating the cooked or fermented inner bark of the ficus tree with a stone or wood beater. Bark cloth was first used by the ancient Maya circa 500 CE. 3 centuries later, they began recording their sacred writings in bark paper codices. Between 1100 and 1300 CE, the Aztecs used amate paper in rituals, offerings, and for tribute. This book is entitled Shamanic Traditions of the Otomi. It's a contemporary amate codex from San Pablito, Mexico, essentially a visual encyclopedia of spirit figures, documenting their traditional cut paper forms and their ceremonial uses. For this book, Miguel Torres, my guide in Powhatan, handled the research and design, while Santos Cantara contributed the papel picado or paper cuts. Here we see a healer working on the left and a spirit of the bad man on the right. One important feature to note is that the good spirits are depicted barefoot, while evil spirits wear shoes. So this detail harkens back to shoe-wearing conquistadors who first began disrupting these cultural traditions. In this detail from Diego Rivera's 1951 mural, Amate Fig Tree and Maguey, at the National Palace in Mexico City, you can see a woman beating bark to make amate paper with a long-handled beater, while another papermaker watches on. Take a close look at the beater. It's a carved stone with vertical grooves mounted on a long handle. This is an important detail. Remember it. Other parts of the mural show the different steps of making and illustrating codices. Here you see 2 stone beaters from my personal collection. On the left is an ancient Mesoamerican beater that would have originally been attached to a handle. It's quite large, too big to comfortably hold in one hand, unless you happen to play for the NBA. However, the contemporary muento, or beater on the right, easily fits in my hand, and it has the correct weight for effectively beating and spreading the fibers. With university support, I traveled to the remote mountains of Powhatan, Puebla, Mexico, to learn directly from the papermaking community of San Pablito. There, I observed the unbroken traditions of the Otomi people and the ways they've adapted their craft in modern times. Thanks to their relative isolation, the conquistadors were unable to suppress their papermaking heritage, allowing these practices to survive when they disappeared elsewhere. As you enter the village, a mural proclaims, San Pablito is a village of artists, and it's not an exaggeration. Here I am geeking out with Don Fausto in his large amate workshop. As I mentioned, historically, amate paper was made from the bark of the ficus tree or fig tree. But today, these trees are largely gone due to overharvesting. Papermakers have switched to other fibers available in the nearby jungle, such as honote and mora, which produce paper with different characteristics. On the right, you can see modern adaptations like the use of bleach to whiten fibers, an innovation that unfortunately has compromised the quality and longevity of the paper. Don Fausto can beat a giant sheet about 12 feet long in less than an hour. It was liberating to watch how he casually distributed the grid of fibers and approached the beating process, especially since I often find myself overthinking and belaboring these very steps. Here you can see large boards with amate drying in the sun on a rooftop. This is a common sight throughout San Pablito, where it seems every household is somehow involved in the production of papel amate. Here's Don Santos cutting away in a little convenience store that doubles as the front of his home in San Pablito. He creates papel picado spirit figures from cut amate paper, a tradition he's now passing on to his son. The paper is folded, then carefully cut, each designed freestyled from memory without a pattern. Here are 2 paper cuts skillfully crafted by Don Santos. Note, these are both good spirits with bare feet. Given that certain Otomi ceremonies can involve bloodletting rituals and the confrontation of dark spirits and illness, I chose to focus my paper cut collection on plant-related spirits instead. I would be remiss not to mention the related tradition of hun, which is beaten bark cloth, an ancient Mayan textile made from inner tree bark that was used for ceremonial attire and clothing. On the left is an original tunic worn by a priest in the Lacandan jungles of Chiapas. This one is housed at Museo Nabalam in San Cristobal de las Casas. And to the right, a replica of a hun tunic. And it makes sense, in places where people started using bark first for clothing, it seems like a natural progression that when they start decorating and embellish it, that eventually it would occur to you to start making bark paper for explicitly writing things down. Throughout my research, I kept returning to this one special book, Primitive Papermaking by Dard Hunter, often considered the father of modern hand papermaking. This handmade book is full of century-old samples, accounts, photos, and illustrations of bark paper and bark cloth. You can use the QR code on the screen to download a PDF of this manuscript from the University of Utah. In the earliest 20th century, Hunter traveled the world collecting samples and documenting traditional papermaking practices. In this book, he explores hand-beaten bark papers, not only from Mexico and Indonesia, but also bark cloth, including tapa from Polynesia and kapa from Hawaii. For the samples alone, it's worth a trip to the special collections. It is true that the heavy coarse sheets of the Otomi Indians of Mexico and the refined Dalwang paper of Java are made in a totally different manner from any form of molded paper. Yet, I have never heard either referred to by the natives except by its correct name, paper. Names are important. When I first began serious research into papermaking, I can't tell you how many books I nearly launched across the room at a wall because of the racist and ethnocentric views I found within. If you mention beaten bark paper to paper scholars, they'll look you straight in the eye and tell you it's not true paper. Never mind that it's made from similar or the same fibers and used in much the same way. Bark paper gets labeled as pseudo paper, proto paper, and simply just not paper. This traditional limiting definition of paper, which only recognizes mold-made papers, reflects a history dominated by white male perspectives. No disrespect to those who came before, I'm just stating the facts. Now, in the 21st century, it's time for a definition of paper that's truly inclusive, celebrating all traditions, inviting everyone to the conversation, regardless of the tools they use. It's a personal mission of mine to correct this definition and shine a light on the remarkable achievements of non-Western cultures. When I was first considering applying for a Fulbright research grant, my initial instinct was to return to Mexico and further study amate. But the unknown connections waiting in Indonesia pose an exciting challenge. Thanks to this quote and a push from Tim Barrett to step outside my comfort zone, I moved across the world, learned a new language, and immersed myself in a tradition that was familiar yet unfamiliar. So here we have Brucenicia papyrifera on the left, which is paper mulberry, and on the right, Ficus benjamina, or weeping fig. And these are bast fibers. A bast fiber is basically what we want, the inner bark of certain plants, right? That's used for bark cloth, bark paper, textiles, cordage, industrial materials. And what we're after here is the long, durable fibers that you can find within. In addition to these main bast fibers used for bark cloth and bark paper, breadfruit, yanchama, and as I mentioned, honlote are frequently used to make bark cloth and bark paper. Hi, everyone, this is Monkey. All right, let's go. All right, in 2017, 2018, I spent a year living in Indonesia, primarily on the island of Java, to study Dalwang, their traditional form of beaten bark paper making, made with the inner bark of the paper mulberry tree. It's the same tree used in the Japanese washi papermaking tradition we discussed earlier. While the earliest known reference to Dalwang is from the 9th century, the earliest example of Dalwang paper can be traced back to the 14th century. It was historically used for Islamic and Hindu manuscripts and ceremonies. This is Teddy Pramadi, who was my primary Dalwang mentor during my year abroad. He is the assistant professor of philology at the Indonesian University of Education in Bandung. He spent decades studying ancient manuscripts and reviving the lost art of Dalwang papermaking. He's reconstructed the papermaking process, reproduced tools from himself and others, and also helped to reintroduce Dalwang into Hindu ceremonial life. Thanks to his efforts since the late 90s, Dalwang was officially recognized as part of Indonesia's intangible cultural heritage. On the right are his alloy metal beaters, fabricated from historic renderings, with handles wrapped in bicycle handlebar tape, a welcome ergonomic upgrade. The two beaters have grooves spaced at different intervals, which helps the papermaker control how the fibers move, spread, and accumulate thickness. If you'd like to read more about Teddy Permati, you can read my interview with him in the winter 2019 issue of Hand Papermaking magazine. Throughout my research travels, I was inspired by artists growing their own fiber gardens. Sahe is the Sundanese word for paper mulberry. It was basically eradicated from the country of Indonesia after volcanic eruptions in the 1960s. Today, papermakers work together growing fiber, making tools, sharing instruction, and even providing finished sheets to other makers. On the left, you can see Ferris Wibisono, who lives with his family in Wonogiri, East Java. He's far from the center of the current hub of Dawang papermaking in Bandung, West Java. So he grows his own sahe trees for use at their home-based Javanese cultural center, where the family shares traditional arts and music with their village. These are the tallest paper mulberry trees I have ever seen. And with the ideal climate, they can get 2 harvests a year of these gigantic trees. So unlike the amate tradition, where you first cook and then shred the inner bark into thinner strips before hand beating, to make dawang, you use the entire strip and beat it to expand it. First, it's soaked in water, and then you just beat it until you've got blisters on your fingers, or at least that was my experience. Here you can see a well-loved beater made by Teddy Permati. It's an early prototype without the addition of bicycle tape on the handle for comfort, hence the blisters. You can see how the grooves influence the sheet formation as the beater spreads and expands the fibers, ultimately creating a watermarked effect. Here is Mufid Saruri harvesting sahe at the base to show me the traditional method of dawang paper making. When each sheet was finished, we folded it up into a bundle you see on the right, and then they were wrapped inside of a banana leaf and let to sit for 3 nights, which allowed time for a snotty fermentation to occur on the surface of the sheet, which I believe is a vital step in achieving a lustrous finish. When you hold a good piece of historic dawang up to the light, you can see how evenly the fibers are spread out across the whole sheet. In some spots, it almost looks cloudy like a sheet of abaca paper made with pulped fiber and a molten deco, even though dawang is actually made by beating the whole bark strip by hand. It's extremely impressive how smooth and consistent the surface turns out. Modern makers still haven't been able to achieve this characteristic. It's something unique to the old dawang sheets. And there's a related and earlier tradition of beaten bark cloth in Indonesia. Here are a set of beaters from Sulawesi. They look nearly identical to the Diego Rivera mural of Mesoamerican women beating amate paper. I'm not an anthropologist, but it's hard to believe that ancient Polynesians navigating in longboats didn't bring these tools and traditions to some of the early peoples of Central America. They all have a carved stone with vertical grooves mounted on a long handle, and the similarities feel too specific to be pure coincidence. These photos are from research trip to Sulawesi, trekking through the jungle of Bada Valley to study bark cloth traditions. On the left is Mama Melia, a topobea, or bark cloth maker, holding a special beater we'll see in detail next. On the right is a gentleman wearing ceremonial attire for a local wedding I was grateful to be invited to attend. Both are wearing full bark cloth outfits, which today are saved only for special occasions. And this is Mama Melia's special beater, a family heirloom passed down through countless generations. The floral motif carved into the beater stone creates a decorative watermark, which you can see on the right when the cloth is backlit. It's absolutely amazing. In historical research, Indonesian bark cloth is called fuya, but today the topobea in Sulawesi have reclaimed the name ranta. Here the cloth is dyed with indigo, morinda, and mud. The ranta is made in Sulawesi and shipped to Bali, where Cintabumi artisans use natural dyes to transform the bark cloth into modern accessories, helping younger generations reconnect with their cultural heritage. In 2024, I co-curated Bark Rhythms, Contemporary Innovations in Ancestral Traditions, along with papermaker Jill Powers for the second guest-curated exhibition triennial for North American hand papermakers. The show featured 18th through 21st century examples of hand-beaten bark cloth, bark paper, and tools, pairing traditional pieces alongside the work of contemporary artists from global communities. Bark Rhythms features work from Indonesia, Hawaii, Polynesia, Mexico, and Central Africa, and was exhibited at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Nitsa Knoll Gallery in Denver, Colorado. There are simply too many artists to mention by name right now, so their social media handles will be shared in the chat. The goal of the exhibition was to broaden awareness around these living traditions and to show the full spectrum from cloth to paper. Sharing these artworks with fellow papermakers and curious visitors was a true joy. Keep an eye out for the catalog this fall from NAHP. Okay, so now that we've discussed bark paper, let's talk about natural dyes. My dye making journey began in Iowa, and I definitely got lucky with my first few indigo vats. A few things about indigo might surprise you. First, it's not exclusive to a single plant species, and it doesn't start out blue at all. The indigo color is actually locked inside the plant in a form called indican, which is completely colorless. Indigo dyeing is a fascinating but intricate process, so I'll give you an overview of the steps, but I will say it's deeply satisfying, and I encourage you to try it. When you crush or soak indigo leaves in water, enzymes naturally in the plant or bacteria in a fermentation bath can break down indican into two parts, glucose and indoxyl. Indoxyl floats in the liquid, and it's still not blue yet. It's soluble in water, which means it can soak into the cloth or paper you add to the vat. While the vat here appears blue on top, beneath the surface, it's actually closer to a lime green, light turquoise color. When you lift fabric or fiber out of the vat and expose it to air, it magically turns blue. And the best part, you don't need any mordant or chemicals to fix the color. It's locked in and it won't wash out easily. The intense New Mexico sun can be a lot for my indigo plants, but if you maintain a careful equilibrium of water, they can thrive. This is Japanese indigo or Persicaria tinctoria. On the right, you can see the lovely purple seed pods in autumn. Inside, they're full of hundreds of tiny, shiny black seeds ready to grow more indigo the next year. Seed saving is another key part of sustainable gardening. It lets you preserve plant varieties, adapt them to your local conditions, and reduce the need to keep buying seeds year after year. When you do buy seeds, I recommend seeking out small regional shops that offer native and heirloom varieties. In Bali, it's common to place small offerings of flower everywhere, including your indigo vat. I've brought this ritual home with me to the desert as a gesture of respect and gratitude to the spirit of the dye. It honors the belief that everything has life and energy, even the vat. In this case, large soup pots. On the right, you can see the sheen of victory on the top of my indigo vat. That coppery sheen means the vat is alive and ready to dye. DYE. Here are a few hits from my garden. This is Dyer's chamomile, a perennial plant known for an abundance of yellow flowers throughout the summer, which can be used to create a vibrant yellow dye. These are black magic bachelor's buttons. They grow well in New Mexico as an introduced wildflower, and its purple petals can also be used to dye. This is madder with its adorable star-shaped greenish yellow flowers. And this is a plant of true patience. After planting, you must wait 3 to 4 years before harvesting its thick red roots for dye making. And trust me, it's work. This is a safflower plant at sunset, no filter needed. On the right, this stunner is contributing to the pollinator path. And these are exactly the kinds of hard and spiny badass plants that thrive in the desert. While not native, these plants were introduced by early Spanish settlers who used it as a substitute for saffron in their dishes. This tiny bowl of precious petals took me an entire summer to harvest, but now I have a bounty of seeds to grow even more next year. This is a fierce plant to reckon with. It pricks you when you harvest its petals. Its seeds are buried deep inside a tough pod and wants to rip your fingernails off. I stomp them out with a combat boot, and that seems to do the trick. A primary concern of mine has been giving back to all the creatures who have found their way to this once barren patch of land. The Hopi black sunflower on the right is prized for the rich purple dye its seeds produces. I've grown it successfully for 4 years, but when harvest time comes, I can't bring myself to take the seeds from the migrating birds who rely on them. I don't see myself as a landowner, but rather as someone who owes something back to the land, a steward entrusted with its care. If a plant is devoured by a creature, I'm cool with it. I'm willing to accept defeat and start over the next season. This is extremely slow art. But working at the pace of the weather and the seasons, it keeps me humble. My process is a conscious rejection of mass-produced consumerism, instead embracing the slow unfolding of crafted materials. I work in a way that respects the rhythms of nature and does not prioritize my practice over the needs of non-human animals. Growing in the ground is desert 4 o'clock, a native perennial beloved by hummingbirds. In the pots are 6 mulberry trees and 3 Ficus benjamina. Behind the pots is a cameo from my longest beating board, which is too large to store in our old adobe. We live in the high desert, zone 6B, with cold winters and hot, dry summers. Since we're in the mountains, 7,200 feet above sea level, we have a relatively short frost-free window. Despite having more than 300 days of sunshine a year, our growing season is only about half that. So while I'm developing this garden, I've decided to keep the trees in terracotta pots for now. This way I can bring them into our sunroom to overwinter, instead of facing below freezing temperatures outdoors. By growing both paper fibers and natural dyes at home, I'm hoping that within the next year and a half, I'll be able to make a book where every material was grown right in my garden, a hyper-local approach to art making. So we're going to go way back to the summer of 2015, when I eagerly signed up for Tatiana Ginsberg's summer class at UICB, which focused on paper and natural dyes. I showed up not wanting to dye pulp or finish sheets like the normal kids. I wanted to work with unbeaten kozo fiber. This early experiment of Thai kozo with lotus leaf dye allowed me to start to detect landscapes suggesting themselves within the gradient of the fiber. This is an early piece from UICB using hand-printed polymer plates when I was still working with the natural color of the kozo fiber. The text is a diatribe about bark paper and not paper that I wrote in English, translated to binary code, and then transformed into my own invented hieroglyphs. Back then, I joked that in a few years, robots would probably be able to break the cipher in seconds. And the truth is, with AI, we're probably already there. This is Codex Yash, etc. This book came from a kozo tree that I harvested in Iowa and features a 5-color screen print. This artist book explores the lack of distinction between the words blue and green in cultures worldwide. The idea was spurred when I learned the word yash, Y-A-X, in Yucatec Maya meant both blue and green. At this stage, I was still printing on paper. It was more closely aligned with the Maya codices, which were coated with gesso and then illuminated. In this work, highlighting the fiber was important, but I also wanted the image to feel more integrated into the material. This is a 12-foot material model of the Dresden Codex, which I made using Thai kozo. Here it is wet before drying and folding. Though the original codex was composed of connected sections, I felt it was important to attempt this project at scale and to create a single continuous sheet rather than piecing multiple sheets together. With my MFA thesis, I made a breakthrough. While traveling through Mexico, I kept marinating on how so many cultures share an ancient flood myth. I was also still captivated with all of the cultures worldwide that use a single word to describe the colors blue and green. This work is inspired by the Great Flood, but also it's about acknowledging that blue and green are not just colors, but are a spectrum of life. After weeks of preparing a giant indigo vat and dyeing fibers, I spent over 22 hours laying out and beating these fibers. In Codex Chupkobal, I swung for the fences, making this expansive art book based on the dimensions of the Dresden Codex. And ultimately, this piece is mounted on the wall. Now, in the Dresden Codex material model I made, I mentioned I used Haikozo. There's a number of reasons for that. It offers a more natural tan brown color, which is a bit closer to ficus. It's also more economical. I typically tend to work with Japanese kozo. It's a whiter fiber that takes on the dyes of the plants well. And in the right light, the finished piece will kind of shimmer like fish scales. It really has an incredible quality. And also, I really like this cultural mashup. I mean, clearly, I'm not a person of Mesoamerican descent. I'm a white woman from the United States who's deeply interested in these different cultural traditions around the world. And so I further mix it up by taking fiber from Japan and working in a tradition that's based in Mesoamerican, but I've innovated it myself to create this new way of creating images within the fiber. This is Kodashis Yashitos, and this continues my investigation in the concept of yash and the blue-green life-giving gradient. These are 8 one-of-a-kind hand-beaten miniature books that are stacked on a tiered wall mount. And they're bringing this viewer from land to sky. In this piece, I embedded myself in the paperwork by hand setting metal type with excerpts from my DNA code and blind printing it onto each miniature book, creating a tactile and intimate connection between the work and its maker. If you made it to this talk, you've likely heard of pulp painting, which is using dyed or pigmented pulp to create designs and images in a wet sheet of paper. I think of my process similarly, though I call it bark drawing, as I meditatively lay out plant-dyed fiber for hours on end. After living for a year each in Indonesia and Cleveland, I returned to the high desert of New Mexico, and I was immediately drawn back into the landscape. East of Albuquerque are the Sandia Mountains. Sandia means watermelon in Spanish, a name inspired by the mountain's pink hue at sunset. In contrast, just up the road in Santa Fe, our mountain range is called the Sangre de Cristo, or the blood of Christ, a dramatic name for the deep red glow they take on at dusk. The title of this work is Sangre de las Sandias, Blood of the Watermelon, which is a playful merging of the two. At the time, my partner and I were living in a 300 square foot tiny house with our 2 orange cats. So I was making small work to sketch out ideas and see how much detail I could illustrate in the bark. A year later, COVID hit, and I rented a small studio space so I could keep working on my bark paperworks without our cats tap dancing across them as they dried. During that time, I spent a lot of my free hours hiking, reflecting on all the horrible things that humans do. The landscapes I made from this period, while they may appear as serene desert scenes, are actually charged with a sense of screaming into the void, or at least that's how I see them. This paperwork grapples with the reality that these beautiful places exist on stolen land, a truth that adds another layer of tension and responsibility to the act of looking and making. This landscape, entitled Desaparecida, Spanish for disappeared woman, was created while reflecting on the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, not only in the Southwest Desert, but all across North America, including First Nations communities in Canada and other Indigenous territories. And as always, New Mexico is reckoning with massive wildfires. I was going through it. It was a dark time. But once I was able to manifest landscapes with more definable features, I went more maximal and I was trying to do the most. I find myself increasingly drawn to the challenge of adding greater detail to my landscapes. Here's a behind the scenes of the birthing of a juniper tree on the Dale Ball Trail in the foothills east of Santa Fe. My process is meticulously drawing by moving plant-dyed fiber with my fingers or an awl. On the left, you see it wet, being built up layer by layer. On the right is a close-up of the dried tree form. The absurdity of cutting down trees to make portraits of other trees is not lost on me. So here's the entire scene dried and folded. I like that the accordion fold really changes how the viewer interacts with the landscape. It shifts depth perception as you move around it. And the way the light shimmers across the kozo adds another dimension, almost like the piece is breathing. I also love the codex format because you get to enjoy the backside when it's on display, or at least take a peek. And you don't need to hang it. It's always my preference that the viewers can directly see the fiber without glass or plexi in the way. But just as I began to feel at ease with capturing more detail, able to create whatever I set my mind to, I realized I was starting to grow bored with it. Knowing I could do it was important for my practice, but suddenly I felt free to make whatever I wanted. I found myself drawn to creating more meditative abstract paperworks. Here's a close-up. I love how the waves undulate across the folds. It really gives the piece a sense of motion, like the waves are shifting as you interact with them. On the left is a colored pencil sketch of an imagined landscape from my sketchbook. On the right is the final piece, still damp, face down after the beating process, almost a mirror image. My background in graphic design helps me translate the vision in my head into first a sketch and then a tangible object, though there's always room for the fibers to move around in their own way. Some of the abstraction happens naturally when working upside down and backwards. Add in the spontaneity and force of beating the paper, and the process itself starts shaping the image. This piece is made with Japanese kozo. At the bottom, it's left with its natural color, and above, there's two distinct layers of indigo dye. For me, this piece is home, where the sky, water, and land converge. Is it a container, an impending tsunami, a moment of equilibrium? I leave that up to you to interpret. Featuring minimal color blocking, the Cognate series captures fleeting moments of transition, where shifts in light and color reveal subtle changes of day and season. These paperworks reflect on how repeated actions, whether observing, making, or connecting, shape our perceptions and offer new ways of seeing the world around us. As a self-professed Carl Sagan fangirl, his quote, "We are a way for the universe to know itself," has always resonated with me. And I see a parallel in my own work, part offering, part reflection, part time machine. In any case, thank you for listening to me wax poetic about a few of my favorite things. And thanks to Deepening and the New York State Council of the Arts. It's always a pleasure to share my passion for plants and bark paper with a new audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This was really a great presentation. I feel like I learned a lot, and it was nice to see all of the connections that you're making. So if you're watching this and you have questions for Lisa, feel free to go ahead and put them into the chat, into the Q&A button there. One question that is in our question and answer already is people said, Mickey has asked, it's an amazing presentation. Will there be a transcript or a copy to get all the names? So the names that we shared so far in the chat are all from the exhibition that you curated, right? So would that would also be at the museum on their website?
Yes.
But also when we put the recording up, there'll be additional information in there as well, some of those things. One thing well, of course, as you know, I love natural dyes. And so it's nice to see all of the ways that you've been able to grow things in your, intense environment there in the desert. It's pretty special. One thing I was going to ask you about was mordants, like if there's any particular mordants that you like to use to fix the color to the bark, or if there's any things that you have noticed are a little bit different about dyeing bark than dyeing maybe paper pulp or something like that.
Sure, that's a great question. So with mordants, when I was first exploring natural dyes, I took a really deep dive. I had a residency at the Morgan's Conservatory where I basically just focused on making every single dye I could with every single mordant for different amounts of times to try to get a sense of what colors I could achieve. In that, I realized just how toxic all of these mordants are, and I didn't really want to work with them. It was challenging, and trying to find the most sustainable ways to work with this practice without creating toxic water that you then have to deal with. But I did discover this amazing mordant in Indonesia, which comes from mangrove roots and is sustainably harvested. Um, it is called Symplocos, Symplocos. You can find it on MyWa's website, and it is an alum-rich plant that you can use. So instead of using a chemical alum, you can get it from this plant, and I just love working with it, and I couldn't say enough about it. I recommend everyone try it.
Very cool. That's really wonderful to have some of these other resources. And it's also, I think, nice because you're gathering things from all across the world and finding ways to use them in your practice, which is wonderful. We have a couple of other questions. Um, one is, are you able to grow enough plants for all the dye that you need? And so Meg writes, I'm just learning about natural dyes, but it seems like one needs a lot relative to the amount of fiber, which definitely is true. So what would you say to that?
Well, what I've been doing is like collecting. So I'm trying to amass enough so that I can make one book with all of my natural dyes. I do small projects where, I'll work on a smaller book with dyes just from my garden, but it is an issue about how you can get enough quantity for the dyeing. Um, yes, if I would focus on the plants that you're most interested in and just grow a lot of them.
That's a good answer. And I mean, some, as you say, like madder, you have to really have a lot of patience for and know that it's going to take a long time before those plants are ready, or something like safflower, which is going to be very prickly and hard to work with, and you won't get very much, but it will be worth it in the long run.
That's right.
Yes, absolutely. Um, and Heather's asking, do you use other colors, prickly pear, cactus, hibiscus, peppers, etc.? Are there other things that you like, or things that could maybe come from your local environment there?
Well, the very first slide featured kota with Navajo tea. And that one I really love. It's a medicinal herb. It was used as like a breakfast drink by Native people for a very long time before coffee was introduced. Um, and it also makes this kind of rusty red dye. And I've been so grateful. I reached out to an individual who invited me to his home and offered me seeds, and I've brought them back to my house, and they have absolutely exploded everywhere. My entire yard is covered in them. And so now I have the opportunity now to offer this native plant back to Indigenous folks who need to use it for their personal use. So it's kind of about this sharing practice. I really do use kota a lot. You mentioned prickly pear. That's another slow art moment. I just started trying to grow prickly pear from seed, which is going to take about 4 years. So again, starting at the beginning, and I'll slowly get there. But there's a lot of amazing plants in the desert that can be used for dye and have been used by Native people for a very long time. The book I don't know if I have the name off the top of my head, but like Navajo dyes, something like that you can find, and it brings you through all of the plants available in this region.
Mhm. And sort of along those lines, one of our attendees is asking if you've had any success making paper pulp from native trees and plants. Are there
That's a
things that,
next step.
yeah,
That's in my mind. I really need to get with a local botanist and see what they think are going to be the best bast fibers available. But that is on my radar. Um, I'm currently working through the fiber backstock that I currently have in my sunroom. So it'll become more of a dire situation once that's all been used.
very good. Um, and another question was if you could share the QR code for the Dard Hunter book again.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Would you maybe go back to that in your presentation and pull that back up so that people can take a minute? I know it's
Yeah.
at Utah.
Let's see. University of Utah. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great.
We can leave that up on the screen for a few minutes so people can take a moment to find that, which is it's a really wonderful resource to be able to get some of those kinds of things. Obviously, it's not the same as being in front of the book in real life, but one thing you talked about a lot was sort of the experience of maybe going to see some things like the Dresden Codex in real life, and you know, I I feel like one aspect of your research that's really special is that you've gone all of these different places and been able to sort of connect some of these dots for people that maybe can't go everywhere, to sort of see the connections between the different cultures and then the differences in the tools and specific ways that people are beating or doing things like that. And you mentioned that you've kind of innovated a little bit in, sort of done your own thing. But what are the things you still feel like maybe are challenges or things that you either would want to change maybe yourself as you go along, or things that you feel like more research needs to be done on this, like by you, by somebody. Are there any things that, kind of come to mind as like stumbling blocks or things that, you would like to see other people dive into?
Well, I mean, yeah, I would love an anthropologist at the beginning of their career to come through and just like really solidify these connections that I've been able to visually detect, but without proof in the pudding, it's just my words. And I have a strong feeling that I'm on the right path, but I would love to see that proven in my lifetime. Um, I mean, other than that, it would be that the paper community at large would accept these papers as paper. I mean, they clearly are. I'll fight anyone, but bark paper is paper. I mean, it's in the name. Let's be real. I mean, that is a big challenge I find, and getting exhibitions about this, like getting recognition for the artists still working in these crafts. I think that is something that could absolutely be lifted up and changed. And it's such a fascinating, window into, our ancestors worldwide. And I think the fact that these are living traditions that are so overlooked and underrepresented, I think that would be the biggest challenge, would be to help shine a light on all the people who've been working on this for centuries.
Yeah, that's very well put. And I mean, I think probably a lot of people watching this right now are rethinking how to speak about bark papers, and we don't really have a lot of information. Most people who, even in the paper community, as you mentioned, people don't really know that much about it, and they think of it as a sort of a separate thing, but it's all connected, as you pointed out. We have a question from Heather about whether the sun is especially in New Mexico, might act as a natural bleach for the fibers versus using commercial bleach.
I mean, I think any bleaching would be somewhat subtle. I mean, I've tried it. I haven't seen huge results in the end. I mean, certainly if you're looking for a bright white, the bleach is going to be the most direct way to get there, unfortunately.
True. Unfortunately, it was invented for a reason, but yes, I'm sure there is some natural bleaching that happens in, exposure. And another attendee asks, it said or writes, it sounds like you are mainly influenced by cultural, historical, hands-on research. Are there other sources of inspiration for you? And of course, you mentioned the landscapes of that environments, but are there other maybe things that you feel like fuel your creative process that you want to talk about?
I mean, I think it all comes back to some of like the big questions about why we're here and what is the purpose of being on Earth, and trying to make connections between everything that's surrounding us. And a big connector for me has been the fact that like I've been nourished by plants in so many ways, and that they really have been this like central focal point to my entire existence. And honoring that connection has been a true inspiration. And the deeper I get with it, the more I know that I'm on the right path and everything feels clicked in and right.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to look at things. And I like very much that you're thinking so much about the environment that you live in and what will grow there. And the sort of, as you said, you're kind of hyper local, making everything yourself. And I've seen that from you for many years through your work. And it's really nice to see how you've been able to find so many different ways of making your work happen. And is there anything you want to say more about the sort of process? You talked a little bit about drawing and thinking through all of the steps, but it's quite remarkable to think about making something, beating it like crazy, and actually having it come out the way that you thought it would. So I was curious if you wanted to say anything more about that sort of process of, learning what the materials will do and sort of being able to figure out a little bit how to predict the unpredictable.
I mean, it again requires patience and, the ability to make mistakes and, learn from them and move on. Sometimes I make a piece and everything's right except one little thing got beat out of place and it's not going to work for me. I'm going to start over. And those moments are tough, but, again, I learned from them. And it's the whole process is kind of a joy. I lose so much time when I'm drawing with bark fiber. It really does become this like meditative process where, I mean, it needs to because it takes the better part of an entire day to complete. But I find myself really connecting with the practice and like with ancient makers in a way, even though I'm kind of going off in my own way. Like when I'm beating that stone, when you're creating that sound, you do feel connected with the people who've come before you and the people who simultaneously are beating around the world. There is kind of this like life force feeling, and that connection I think is really important.
It's beautiful. And maybe that's a good place to end since we're just right at the time. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being with us tonight, and to everybody who was here for the webinar. And we really appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing what you do next at Duchess Press.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's listened today. Thank you.